The year was 1837, deep in the cane fields of Louisiana, where the nights were thick with mosquitoes and the days burned with a sun that showed no mercy. Chains clinked like iron hymns in the humid air, and the crack of the overseer's whip split the silence of dawn like thunder across the river. On that soil, where every stalk of sugar was watered with sweat and blood, one woman carried more than a burden of labor. She carried life inside her. Her name was whispered among the quarters, a young woman heavy with child, her belly rising beneath the coarse fabric she was given to wear. Every step across the fields pressed the weight of two worlds upon her shoulders, one unborn, one enslaved. And though her body bent under the lash of labor, her spirit never bent to the cruelty that claimed the land. It was in the heart of a storm, when sky and earth collided in rage, that she made her choice: to run, to risk, to carry freedom in her womb. This story belongs to her, though her name has been lost to the pages that history never bothered to keep. She lived on a Louisiana sugar plantation in the years when the cotton gin and the cane press had turned human bondage into an empire's foundation. She was one among thousands, her body owned, her labor extracted from dawn until the last ember of light. But within her, something the overseer could not chain began to grow. A child who would not inherit the same soil of captivity, if she had anything to say about it. The world she walked in was brutal and unrelenting, a system designed to grind human beings into tools. Yet even in that unyielding world, she carried a dream: to break free before her baby took its first breath, to ensure that the first cry of life was not answered by the crack of a whip. If this story reaches you, carry it forward. Share it, so silence does not erase it. For every heartbeat in her belly was also a cry for justice, and justice demands to be remembered. The plantation stretched for miles, rows of cane rising like a green army beneath the relentless Louisiana sun. The air was thick with humidity, clinging to the skin, filling the lungs, and making each breath feel heavy. Dawn arrived not with birdsong, but with the sound of the iron bell that summoned men, women, and children from the rough-hewn shacks that lined the quarters. She rose with the others, her swollen belly pressing against the thin cloth she wore, the child inside her shifting as if restless before the day had even begun. Each morning began with a bitter taste of ash and smoke from the small fires where families boiled what scraps they could find: cornmeal, molasses if fortune allowed, a piece of salted pork only if the master's stores yielded excess. Hunger was a constant companion, gnawing and sharp. The food was never enough to replenish what the fields demanded. Her hands, though blistered, were expected to cut and bind cane stalks as swiftly as any man's, her sweat soaking through the coarse dress mingling with the sweet, sticky juice that seeped from the cut cane onto her skin. The scent of sugar, sharp and cloying, hung in the air, but to her it was no sweetness, only the reminder of unending toil. The overseer rode on horseback along the rows, a whip coiled like a serpent in his hand. His eyes were always watching, seeking the faintest slowing of pace, the smallest falter. Punishment was swift and public. She had seen men tied to posts and lashed until their skin peeled away, women forced to endure whippings even when their cries carried the sound of both pain and unborn life. Children were not spared. Small hands that missed a stalk or stumbled over the dirt were struck, their cries blending with the calls of crows circling above the fields. Yet within this brutality, life persisted. In the quarters at night, the air filled with the low hum of voices. Old men and women told stories in fragments, pieces carried from across the ocean, tales of a land many had never seen but still called home in their hearts. Around those fires, she often pressed her hands against her belly and listened. She knew the child would be born into this world of lashes and chains, yet she prayed that the voices of resistance, the soft hymns, the coded songs that whispered of rivers, roads, and stars, would carry her child toward something greater. Sundays were rare respites, though even rest was shadowed by control. The enslaved gathered in the clearing, singing hymns that seemed to rise higher than the cane fields, hymns that stitched sorrow and hope together in words the master could not fully understand. She sang too, her voice trembling but steady, feeling the rhythm of her own mother's voice echoing within. Religion was both comfort and resistance. They spoke of deliverance in hushed tones, drawing strength from the stories of Moses and Exodus, She clung to those verses like a rope in floodwaters, believing that deliverance somehow could reach even her. At night, exhaustion pressed down heavy. The quarters smelled of earth and sweat, damp wood, and the faint sweetness of cane carried on the wind. She lay on the rough pallet, the baby inside shifting again, and she whispered promises to it. Promises that one day, the fields would not claim them both. Her husband had been sold south the year before, torn from her arms on an auction block in New Orleans, his face the last image she carried of him. She did not know if he was alive, but she carried his spirit, and she carried his child. The nights, stretched long, filled with the sounds of rattling chains, murmured prayers, and the haunting cries of those who had been punished. But there were also songs, low, steady, carrying secrets of direction and escape, their melodies weaving through the dark like lantern light. Those songs told of rivers that flowed north, of stars that pointed the way, of men and women who had walked into the woods and not returned, their names whispered as if they had reached another shore. She listened, memorized, and hoped. This was the world she knew, a world where the soil beneath her bare feet was rich, not with freedom, but with the bones and sweat of those who came before her, a world where she bent under labor yet still stood, carrying in her womb the fragile flame of life. Every day was survival, but within survival lay the seed of defiance. She knew the overseer's whip could break skin, but it could not silence the promise she whispered to the child she carried, that one day they would breathe free air together. The story of her escape began long before the storm broke across the Louisiana sky. It began with the sound of her husband's name being called on the auction block in New Orleans. She remembered the way he had stood tall, shoulders straight, though his wrists bore shackles, eyes fixed on her as if to carve her image into his memory one last time. The bidding was quick, the numbers shouted as if they were cattle prices, and then he was gone, swallowed by the river of commerce that traded human lives for profit. That day, something hardened within her. She carried the weight of his absence in her chest and the weight of his child in her womb. Both became her reason to survive. Back on the plantation, the rhythm of life moved on without pause. The fields demanded, the overseer's whip demanded, the master's accounts demanded. But she worked differently now. She calculated. Each row of cane was no longer only a row to be cut, but also a path that might one day lead her away. Every glance at the horizon became a measure of distance. Every hymn sung in the quarters a lesson in coded directions. The elders spoke of the north, of a river that ran wide and could carry people away from bondage. Others whispered of the Underground Railroad, a line of strangers bound together not by blood, but by a shared faith in freedom. These whispers were dangerous, but they rooted in her heart like seeds refusing to die. The seasons changed. The summer. Heat gave way to the rains of autumn, when the Mississippi swelled and the cane harvest reached its peak. Her belly grew heavy, and the overseer's patience thinned. He barked orders with sharper cruelty, calling her lazy when she could not keep pace, threatening her with the whip, though her body labored with two souls. She bore the strikes across her back with teeth clenched, never letting the sound of her cries give him satisfaction. Each lash deepened her resolve. She knew she had to leave before the baby was born, before its first breath chained it to the same soil that bound her. At night, when the quarters were quiet and the stars glimmered, faintly beyond the smoke of the fires she listened. Songs carried maps within them, directions folded into melody. "Follow the drinking gourd," the elders sang, pointing their eyes to the Big Dipper, the North Star steady above. She memorized the rhythm of those words as if they were scripture. One woman told her of a swamp beyond the edge of the plantation, thick with reeds and mud that horses could not easily cross. Beyond the swamp lay roads, and beyond the roads, safe houses hidden under the cover of barns and churches. She held this knowledge close, feeding it to her courage like grain to a starving animal. Her chance came on a night when the air itself seemed restless. Clouds gathered in the distance, rolling in like dark waves. The overseer, convinced the storm would keep anyone from running, locked the quarters less tightly than usual. She waited until the others lay asleep, her heart pounding louder than the wind outside. With nothing but a small cloth bundle of food, cornbread, a piece of dried meat, and a gourd of water, she slipped into the storm. The rain fell heavy. masking the sound of her footsteps, drenching her until the cloth clung to her skin and her swollen belly glistened beneath the flashes of lightning. She waded through the fields, the cane bending and snapping around her as the wind howled. The mud sucked at her bare feet, but she pressed on, each step carrying her farther from the world that claimed to own her. The swamp loomed ahead, reeds swaying like dark sentinels. She stepped into the water, cold and murky, her breath coming, fast. Frogs croaked and unseen creatures splashed in the darkness, but she pushed forward, lifting her belly with one hand to keep her balance. The storm above became her cloak, thunder rolling like drums of war, lightning revealing the path, for only a heartbeat at a time. Behind her, dogs barked faintly, their voices carried by the wind. She froze, panic seizing her chest. But the storm worked in her favor. The rain drowned the scent, the thunder muffled the trail, and the swamp slowed the riders who might have pursued her. She pressed deeper, branches tearing at her skin, insects biting, water rising to her waist. Each step became agony, but her spirit drove her forward. For hours she trudged, the night stretching long until she reached solid ground on the other side. There, exhausted, she collapsed beneath a tree, her body shaking with both fear and triumph. She could not rest long. Dawn would come, and with it, the hunt. She pressed on, following the faint memory of directions given in whispers. A dirt road appeared, rutted by wagon wheels, and she turned north. Her feet blistered, her body heavy, but her mind clung to the image of her child born free. For 3 days she moved through woods and back roads, sleeping hidden among roots and brush, surviving on the small bundle of food until it was gone. Hunger gnawed at her. Thirst cracked her lips, but still she moved. On the 4th night, pain struck her suddenly, sharp and deep. She fell to her knees, clutching her belly. The child was coming. Panic surged through her, too soon, too exposed. She dragged herself into the cover of trees, biting down on her cloth to muffle her cries. The storm had passed days before, but the echoes of thunder seemed to live within her body now. Sweat poured down her face as the contractions racked her, each wave threatening to tear her apart. Alone, on the edge of freedom, she labored in the dirt. Hours passed, her body writhing, until at last, in the darkest hour before dawn, a cry split the silence. The baby lived. Her arms trembled as she lifted the child to her chest, the small body slick with birth and warm against her skin. Tears blurred her vision, falling onto the newborn's face as she whispered the first words it would ever hear. "You are free." That cry, that fragile sound, carried louder in her heart than any whip crack she had ever endured. She wrapped the child in what little cloth she had, her body weak but her spirit blazing. Word of her reached sympathetic ears. A farmer, himself poor but guided by faith, found her near collapse on the edge of his land. He carried her and the baby to a hidden cellar, where abolitionist hands nursed her back from the brink. From there, the path became one of secrecy and sacrifice. Hidden wagons, barns, and church basements, each step guarded by strangers willing to risk everything. She moved like a shadow through that world, clutching her child, until the day she crossed into the north. Her story spread among those who longed for hope. They called her the woman who outran the storm, the one who bore life into freedom's air. In time, she joined others who had escaped, raising her child in a community of freedmen. The child would grow never knowing the lash, never hearing the iron bell that broke dawn, never tasting hunger as its mother had. The child's first breath had been free, and that made every step of her journey sacred. Her name was never recorded in the ledgers of history, but her story lived in the voices that carried it forward. It lived in the songs sung around fires, in the sermons preached in small churches, in the stories whispered to children who asked how their people had survived. She had done more than survive. She had defied. She had carried freedom, not only in her womb but also in her will, proving that even in the darkest fields of bondage, life could still carve its way toward the light. The climax of her journey came not with the first step into the swamp, nor with the long miles walked in hunger, but with the moment her body betrayed the timing she had hoped for. The child came sooner than she imagined, the contractions tearing through her in the wilderness where no midwife, No elder woman, no comforting hand could guide her. She had thought the storm would be her great trial, but this was the true test. The pain struck like lightning through her body, sudden and merciless. She collapsed onto the damp earth, clutching her belly, her cries swallowed by the dense trees around her. The ground was rough beneath her, roots pressing into her back, the smell of pine and wet soil mixing with the salt of her sweat. She tried to steady her breathing, to remember the songs women had sung in the quarters during births, but the rhythm escaped her. All she had was the ragged sound of her own voice and the knowledge that she could not stop now. The child demanded to enter the world, and she was powerless to delay it. Fear clawed at her. She imagined the overseer's dogs catching her scent, riders breaking through the trees, men on horseback arriving at the moment of her greatest weakness. She imagined the whip waiting for her, or worse, her child taken from her arms and sold before its first sunrise. Every contraction brought not only pain, but also terror, the sense that at any moment her defiance might end with iron shackles once again. The hours dragged on, each one a battle she waged with her own body. She bit down on a strip of cloth to keep her cries low, tasting the dirt and the copper of her own blood. The storm clouds above had passed, but her body thundered with pain. She prayed in gasps, calling on a God she believed had seen his people through deserts and rivers, hoping he would see her through this too. At last, after what felt like an eternity, the child slipped into the world, its wail rising sharp and high against the stillness of the forest. She wept, trembling as she pulled the newborn close, pressing its tiny body to her chest. The sound of that cry cut through her exhaustion, a cry so pure it seemed to echo against every cruelty she had endured. It was the sound of life unshackled, and for a moment the world itself seemed to pause and bear witness. But the moment of triumph was laced with danger. The cry could betray her hiding place. She rocked the baby gently, whispering, to soothe it, her own body shaking with weakness. Blood soaked the earth beneath her, her strength drained, and she knew she had little left to give. For a moment, despair threatened to pull her under. She had made it this far, only to die nameless. In the woods, her child orphaned before it had tasted freedom. Then came the sound of footsteps. Soft, hesitant, human. Her breath caught in her throat. She held the baby tighter, her mind racing between fight and surrender. From the shadows emerged a man carrying a lantern, his face worn but kind, his clothes plain. He knelt at a distance, speaking words she could barely comprehend at first, words of safety, of help. He was no overseer, no master's hand. He was one of those whispered about in the songs, a man who belonged to the chain of strangers who risked their own lives to shepherd runaways toward freedom. In that instant, the turning point arrived. Her fate was no longer a question of survival, alone, but of trust. With trembling arms, she allowed him to lift her and the child, her body too weak to resist even if she had wanted to. He carried them into the night, toward a hidden place where other hands waited, and for the first time, the fear that had clung to her every step began to loosen. The storm had not defeated her. The birth had not broken her. Against every force that had sought to silence her existence, she had endured. The child's cry became more than just a sound. It became a declaration. She had defied the whip, the chains, the auction block, and even the wilderness. She had brought forth life in the midst of struggle, and that life was free. She lived to see her child grow beyond the reach of the lash. In the north, the boy's first steps fell on streets not lined with overseers' eyes, his laughter unbroken by the sound of bells that marked a day of bondage. Yet she never forgot the fields that had claimed her youth, the chains that had scarred her wrists, or the auction block that had stolen her husband. Every scar on her back remained, etched into her skin like a map of suffering, a record of what it cost to claim a single breath of freedom. She carried no papers of manumission, no official record of her escape. History would not write her name, but the story of her defiance passed through the lips of others, woven into songs, sermons, and whispered prayers. Each telling was both a memorial and a warning, a reminder of how far one woman went to give her child a life that began with liberty instead of shackles. When she finally closed her eyes years later, her child at her side, It was said her last words were only this: "You were born free. Remember the price." That was her story. The woman whose name was never written in the ledgers, yet whose footsteps carved a path through storm and darkness toward a fragile dawn of freedom. She carried life through bondage, through hunger, through the weight of chains, and she delivered that life into a world that could not claim it. Her voice may be lost to silence, but her child's first cry remains a testimony stronger than any whip, any law, any overseer. If this story reached you, share your reflection. Speak it aloud, carry it forward, so the world remembers what the soil tried to bury. For her courage was not only for her child, it was for all who came after, so that their names, their breaths, their freedom would not be forgotten.